Hey guys, John Loxley here, back with our reading of Hell or High Water, the part of the bonus material from the Narcosis DLC. All right, so let's see. Back to Normal, Chapter 5. We are on page 22 out of 70. Making pretty good progress, actually. I'm drinking a passion fruit IPA, which is actually, it's by New Belgium. It's a seasonal. It's actually pretty decent. Normally I'm not into the like the foo-foo. It's not really that foo-foo though. It's it's a summer beer, and New Belgium does good stuff. It's about 5% alcohol. It's not super strong. But it's it's a good little like hot day beer, I suppose. And it's getting late in the day. Probably going to go to bed here soon, so I'm drinking it to kind of ease down. Okay, so number 5, back to normal. During our walk, the extent of the damage was revealed. To see it in shambles was disheartening. Although it was a multi-billion-dollar installation, housing cutting-edge technology that took years to develop, it was, to us, our little spot at the bottom of the sea. It was our home, and we'd all gotten quite attached. In the aftermath, one thing was clear. The operation was a total loss. There'd be no getting back to normal. It was hard to envision such a spacious place under the ocean, and even the engineers' thorough presentations left us somewhat skeptical. But when I first set foot inside, I was awestruck. Despite extensive onboarding exercises, including virtual reality walkthroughs and full-scale replicas of key components, the sheer breadth and scope of the place was overwhelming. My expectations, based on a lifelong diet of National Geographic, Discovery Channel marathons, and the occasional disaster movie, had me bracing for the kind of cramped spaces common to most nautical vessels. Right, that's what you'd think. Some of the habitat's sprawling layout was a result of the sheer amount of equipment involved in setting up shop beneath the sea. But beyond that, the people paid to make such calls realized that standard oil rig-sized accommodations simply wouldn't do. The crew would need space to roam, to be alone, and to generally try and ease the effect of spending months at a time unable to step outside for a bit of fresh air. Yeah, maybe. I mean, when it comes to saving a couple $1,000,000 by reducing the living space, they'd probably do that. You're all adults, deal with it. So compared to earlier similar efforts, we had it pretty good. Considering the scale and scope of what we were signing up for, the people working during the early days of deep-sea installations had to deal with far greater hardships. Predecessors to our habitat were transported by ships outfitted with lifting A-frames, large cranes that lowered equipment from the bow or stern of the ship. The equipment itself had to be small enough to fit onto the decks in several plate pieces, and light enough for transport. As a result, most habitats were cramped steel cylinders which snugly housed 4 to 6 aquanauts. That's actually fairly accurate if you're just listening to like the underwater hamster guy talk. He's kind of talked about stuff like this before. It wasn't until the 1980s when innovations seen in habitats like the Chalupa Research Laboratory overcame such limitations. The entire installation was designed similarly to a ship, so it could be moved to different locations by towing vessels. Also true. Moreover, integrated ballast tanks kept it floating on the surface until they wanted it to descend, at which points they'd release pressure, permitting it to sink to the sea floor, eliminating the need for ships outfitted with A-frames. Also true. They did the research, which is pretty awesome. The Oceanova project was the culmination of decades' worth of research into the principles of undersea construction. Gone are the days of confined habitats with all-in-one designs, replaced by massive research facilities with dedicated modules for the crew's needs. The HABs we have today are essentially modules pieced together to create a larger whole, not unlike the ISS. Underwater Hamster Guy is actually working on like a modular design, which is pretty fascinating, actually. Because he's going to have like individual modules that you could detach or put together as needed into different configurations, presumably. But kind of neat to, just hear him talk about it a little bit. It's very kind of dry, I will freely admit. But, every once in a while he's got like the little nuggets of stuff. Hang on a sec. Most of our time was spent at Compass 1, which contained crew housing, research facilities, the methane hydrate freezing center, galley, and the recreation module. A larger second habitat, Compass 2, contained additional facilities relating to the storage and processing of methane hydrate. The two habitats were approximately 1.5 miles from one another and connected by a sort of monorail used to bring cargo, crew, and supplies back and forth. And according to this, what they've previously said is that they're gonna, they mine all the methane from one area, and then it sounded like they move the habitat. So the habitat would want to be modular as well. Compass 2 was at a higher elevation than Compass 1, making it more accessible from the surface. Once the initial processing of the methane was completed at Compass 1, it was sent via pipeline to Compass 2 and stored in large spherical tanks to await delivery to the surface. The distance between the two was a nuisance, to say the least, but far from arbitrary. In the event that the storage spheres were damaged, the area of effect would be considerable. There are a great many things that went wrong, and at every level, on February 2nd of 2021, but we can all be grateful those spheres remained undamaged and intact. Despite the attention and care that had been lavished on the place, the habitat's decor made it feel a bit like staying in a model home. Even though we already had plenty of room to move about in, there were plans to expand on several levels. In this regard, the 20 of us were essentially an advance crew, there to get the ball rolling, while the expansion logistics were fine-tuned. Had things gone as planned, Compass 1 and 2 would have housed more than 60 scientists and engineers within a year or so, comfortably and with plenty of room to spare. The recreation module offered some simple pleasures given the expansiveness of the station. There was a well-appointed cafeteria, exercise facilities, and a recreation module replete with a screening room and various parlor games. As the project was government-backed to a substantial degree, our personal belongings were thoroughly checked prior to arrival for anything inappropriate. Of course, that didn't stop certain people from smuggling certain reminders of home on board. Additionally, you'd think they'd have more than one cook. It's not, I don't know, if you're talking like a full menu every day, cooking's a lot of work. You gotta clean everything, you gotta cook, you gotta prep. At the end of the day, you gotta scrub everything, walls, ceilings, grease traps, all that stuff. Wow, my tongue is really red. Maybe it's just because of the white from the... Where's the light coming? I don't know. It doesn't matter. We'd been given access to a considerable catalog of films, TV shows, and music licensed for the duration of the project. Russ Felon, or however you pronounce that, our senior driller, took a liking to Dark Star, a laughably low-budget science fiction film from the 1970s. A connoisseur of such fare, he'd make obscure references to the film, especially in the docking bay. While getting poured in, our shared slang for getting into an ADS before heading out on a seawalk, he'd joke about surfing in his suit. Unfortunately, we were unable to use any streaming services for amusement, or, for that matter, many of the basic communications most of the world takes for granted. 2 miles of seawater presents several challenges with regards to online networking. Although I grew out of watching movies or playing video games during college, I shared my crewmates' frustration at the restrictions. Some of the policies felt outdated or unnecessary considering the state-of-the-art nature of the entire operation. I remember reading an interview with the astronaut Damien Borghetto, who was aboard the ISS at the time. He talked about watching the World Cup and responding to video messages from students on the internet. The irony was amusing. Even at that distance, the ISS was far more connected to civilization than we were. We couldn't even watch an internet video, and we were still on Earth. We were that remote. Griping aside, a great deal of work had been put into making us feel genuinely comfortable, and for my part in the daily checkups and engineering, it was as safe as possible too. Though my duties occasionally required sea walks, I'd get poured in maybe 2 or 3 times a week on average, I was always accompanied by one of the EVA team. And in the weeks leading up to the disaster, the bulk of my time was spent within the brightly lit, warm confines of the habitat. When I accepted the job, I envisioned a few months affecting maintenance, sipping cocoa on breaks, and peering out of the portholes scattered throughout the lab. I'd conjured up a somewhat soothing experience of living beneath the sea, and while there were definitely moments like that, some of the most fulfilling periods of my professional career, they also spoke to me on a deeper level. I was living where humans were not meant to thrive. So much time and effort and money all pitched in together to create a space for us to live. We felt like special explorers, if just for a short time. For sure, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Work sometimes became a hassle and things could get heated, but I'd gladly take those moments over what we faced as it all collapsed. Waking up to find seawater sprinkling in my face, sealing the crew quarters door, finding the burned body of Dr. Pallavi Mittal Kincaid floating in the hall, clothed in orange, gently batting against my leg. But now we'd reached the hall outside the docking terminal. The doctor and JB were ahead, while I was lagging behind. She was reassuring the older Castillo that this was the right course of action. That said, reassurance wasn't exactly her strongest suit. We waited a few minutes before sealing the door behind us. After the doctor's message, we hoped that we'd find others as we turned the corners of the halls, maybe hear yelling and the sloshing of water behind us. But we didn't. The water was rising and the docking terminal had to be closed off from the flood. After 3 or 4 minutes, JB took the ratchet from me and sealed the pressure door. He stared at us briefly, but didn't protest this time. The doctor approached the wall of the inner docking area and craned her neck at the porthole. "It's docked," she cried, voice bright with relief. We moved into the docking room, and after fiddling with the control panel, the inner hatch swung open, motors whining under the strain, bulky hinges screeching until the procedure had completed. The sub's rear hatch, still damp with seawater, took a bit more work to open. The docking collar, essentially a 9-foot tube connecting the hab to the sub, had been warped, making it unclear whether the sub could still decouple from the habitat. JB and I leveraged the ratchet together, using it as a crowbar. With a reverberating pop, the hatch was open. One by one, we clambered inside. The bulbous, windowless sub, roughly the size of a delivery truck, was designed for ferrying supplies to and from the extractor fields under dry, single-atmosphere conditions. Human occupants were an afterthought. No seating for passengers then, just cold metal crates and cargo bins. There wasn't even a pilot seat, everything operated automatically. With no override mechanism, it was truly designed to be idiot-proof. There was good news, though. The sub carried 4 diving suits as well as a lockout chamber, a sort of aquatic airlock used to deploy and recover the suits towards the rear. A host of small flickering screens made it clear that the sub was operational, providing some small comfort as the 3 of us wedged ourselves between the clunky suits of armor tethered to the walls by a mesh of straps and buckles. How are the suits powered, anyway? Did they, maybe they just skimmed over that fact. I suspect battery, because there was that battery indicator on the suit. I thought it was a tablet when I first started, but turns out I suspected, well, it's the suit's computer. As we were getting settled, the habitat's hull creaked loudly. Another narrow pipe burst on the module's side of the docking collar, issuing a frigid spray of seawater. "Close the terminal door!" shouted JB. I leapt to the rear of the sub, and after poking at the control panel again, the door began to close, slowly, almost as if it mocking our urgency. I ducked back inside, but things are never that simple. It stopped just short of the rim. Creaking, shrieking, grinding, the sound of metal on metal. The opening had been damaged, leaving it slightly deformed, just enough that it wouldn't shut. Cora slammed a palm against the hull. JB went over to the terminal to try and prepare the launch, but the sub's fail-safe systems were engaged. It wouldn't detach itself until the hatches from both the terminal and sub were closed. It was a real dilemma. We had no idea what to do. If we couldn't decouple, then what? Minutes passed as we paced about the sub, trying to come up with something. Then it hit me. We closed the sub's hatch, then just let the module flood. I was rubbing my hands now, both with glee and to keep them warm. "This will equalize the pressure, and we should be able to detach," JB interrupted. "If it doesn't explode." Implode. Risky, yes, but with the pressure mounting against us, literally and metaphorically, what other option did we have? Shaking his head, JB sealed the sub's rear hatch and returned to the front of the sub. With bated breath, we waited for the water level outside to reach the ceiling, wincing shamelessly when a loud clang ricocheted through the sub interior. The sound repeated, farther away this time, 10 seconds later, then again a half-minute after that. I was nervous, worried I had doomed us with a terrible mistake. Instead, with a gentle lurch, the large sub pulled free from the flooded module and set off for Compass 2. I couldn't hear the propulsion system, but I could feel the vibration of the motors through the floor. The bulbous craft had no internal heater, an unnecessary feature for a crewless ship. The three of us, still soaked to the bone, shivered uncontrollably in silence until the numbness set in. Our plan was to use the cargo sub to travel to the extractor field near Compass 2, search for any survivors, shut off the machinery to prevent further methane leakage, finally travel back to the escape pod in Compass 1. I thought the escape pod in Compass 1 was damaged. Right? Yeah, because that was the whole thing. They tried to get to the escape pod and then... maybe it was supposed to be Compass 2. Maybe it's a typo. We couldn't exactly count on things going smoothly, but it felt like a solid plan, even if the others didn't seem to share my sense of optimism. I didn't know what to say or how to diminish the tension. Neither of my companions made eye contact with me, nor with the other. We just huddled in oppressive silence, waiting for the sub to reach its destination. The doctor stared at the monitor, searching for some signs or data that might improve our odds. JB sat alone towards the front of the sub, lost in thought, rubbing his cheeks roughly with both hands. When we were suddenly jostled by a stray current, the suits swayed menacingly, as if threatening to break loose from their restraints. I put one hand on the shin of a nearby suit to steady it, and then felt immediately foolish. In the event of a half-ton of titanium wrenching loose and falling, no number of hands would make a difference. That is true. Would you want to get in the suits anyway? I don't know. I mean, Compass 2 was far enough away that maybe he was, undamaged. Sitting in that cold, sterile sub, I got to think about a lot of things. Also, a tsunami is from an underwater earthquake that over time builds up because the water moves a little bit. And that those little movements over time become big waves. But if you're underwater already, wouldn't an earthquake do just about nothing? I don't know. I mean, it would move the supports for everything. So, yeah. But who knows? Who knows? We'll ignore it. It's, the premise is fine. Disaster happens. It doesn't matter what it is specifically. What had happened and how, and whether we were going to make it out. I'm sure the others thought the same. Tensions aside... Oh, by the way, this is number 6, weight and presence. Tensions aside, we were thankful for each other's company during this ordeal. Still, we kept to ourselves. JB and Cora huddled to one side of the cramped cargo bay. Occasionally, we'd make eye contact. Occasionally, we'd make eye contact, hoping that someone would break the silence. Instead, we settled for the gentle hum of the submersible, which somehow seemed to keep the weight and presence of the ocean at bay. Although it feels trite to say this now, especially in my own account, I wish I knew them better. Not making more of an effort to connect with the crew before the accident was a missed opportunity. These people came from all over the world, and were the best and brightest in their fields. It seems natural to get to know the people you're living with for several months, but not for me. At the time, it was about the work and just being there. That was enough for me, and now I can't help regretting it. We did the average greetings and how do you do's during orientation and general commute around the lab, or hab, but I never really made an effort to get to know them. I did, however, get a chance to make chit-chat with some of the science team while waiting for my weekly evaluations. We were screened before we came down, naturally. With a close-quarters crew, you're going to want to make sure the people living there are of sound mind and body, but ongoing evaluations were also required to identify any early signs of instability. If anyone's about to lose it, the topside crew wants to know before it happens. Not that it would make much of a difference. The closest shorebound contact point was over 1,500 miles away on the coast of Chile, where a large team of researchers and administrators were stationed. They might as well have been on the moon. Okay, that makes sense, actually. Aside from relaying our own situation, which was mostly banal progress reports and equipment checks, we were largely on our own. Okay, so that actually makes more sense now. 1,500 miles. Like, what's the protocol when you lose contact? You know what I mean? Do you send someone out there immediately? Do you wait? You probably send someone out there, to be honest. But even so, 1,500 miles by ship? Or would you take a plane? I don't even know. Even if it was a plane, it would still be a few hours before anything happened. Okay. Let's see. Weekly evals were typically boring, with the occasional invasive question thrown in. We sat in front of a camera, talking candidly about the events of the past week. Feelings, thoughts, whatever came to mind. What bothered me about the whole process was that it was done entirely through a computer program, similar to a web chat style interface. This was due to bandwidth issues, but it gave the process an unsettling vibe. Obviously, the surface was in control of the questions and would deliver the follow-ups, but it was still jarring, to put it mildly. Russ liked to joke that Hal was watching us from the cameras and monitors, and that we should be extra nice to everyone. Some of the prompts were a bit unusual. What do you think about a lost sheep walking on a steep mountain slope? Or, how would you resolve a personal conflict among two friends? It was perplexing at first, but soon became clear they were gauging our empathy and emotional states. Some questions were multiple choice, others asked us to simply share our thoughts. It was mostly simple, but in a few cases they'd ask what we thought of our colleagues' performance and conduct, a prodding technique, to see if any of us showed the signs of hostility or discomfort. Since I mostly kept to myself and undertook only the smallest of small talks with others, opportunities for conflict were kept to a minimum. Ironically, the time spent in the waiting room before our evals was where a few of us bonded the most. Before pouring our hearts out to the camera, we'd share idle chit-chat with one another. I liked talking to JP the most, having found him easy to get along with from the beginning. Dr. Vanderoe, however, I'd only ever spoken to briefly. It's an unfortunate habit of mine, one I've struggled with since my youth. Just passing through, as I like to think of it. Remaining a stranger, interacting with people only as much as necessary. I learned too late that people view this behavior as antisocial. They can sense you don't want to invest in them. All it takes is a simple hello and the willingness to listen to their story. They're just waiting for the signal that it's safe to open up, to invite you into their world. Problem is, most people's worlds are freaking boring. Like, seriously, you know? And most people don't want to talk. I mean, not about engaging stuff. They want to just... I understand this guy's feelings. I understand. But... I don't know. If I'd figured that out sooner, there were a lot of conflicts I could have avoided. When I realized I was falling into old habits during those first few weeks, I pushed myself to seek out anybody who caught my interest and ingratiate myself to them. Meals were another good opportunity to socialize a little. At the bottom of the sea, breakfast, lunch, and dinner are abstract concepts. If not for the clocks found throughout the habitat, we'd never have known what time it was. If we wanted snacks, there was a sizable bounty of frozen meals, chocolate and energy bars, chips, nuts, and other salted snacks, and canned and dried fruits. But as far as proper hot meals, we were at the mercy of whatever Malba had cooked up that day. Imagine being in one of those suits and having eaten something not so great, and you're like, "Oh my god, I gotta go to the bathroom like right now." Like, that's not a good. It's not a good place to be, especially if she's making weird stuff. Although it's probably all bland, easily. I mean, it's got to be shipped there, and yeah. Probably everything frozen. Aries Cerquera was her real name, in charge of kitchen duty and the handling of supplies. She insisted we called her Malba. I couldn't tell you why, and did everything in her power to make sure that she be the world's best underwater cook. She'd ask if you wanted more, or if you felt all right, or if you wanted something else. She was really quite motherly in the way she operated in the kitchen. I can safely say that each and every one of us found it comforting. People always ask me about the food down there. Despite the remote location and the fact that we were living in an unusual environment, our cuisine was largely the same as it was on the surface. We even had the occasional greens yielded from various aquaponic experiments set up around the hab. Despite all this, vitamins and other supplements were still needed to make up for the lack of sunlight and undersea living conditions. Nothing especially fancy, but we weren't exactly drinking our meals out of plastic bags. Mashed potatoes, for instance, needed hot water, the powdered potato packet, and a spoon to stir it with. Simple, but Malba went out of her way to make sure everyone got what they wanted. Within reason, of course. Unless you requested something in particular, Malba prepared most of the meals in bulk. All the recipes could be handled by anyone with the most basic of culinary skills, but she insisted on trying to spice things up a bit, mixing different types of meals together for some strange but tasty concoctions. That's not to say it was perfect. It was over one of Malba's questionable concoctions, an ensemble of red pepper curry and turkey chili, that led to my first meaningful interaction with Dr. Vanderoe. As she picked at her walnut lettuce salad pulled together from our vegetable crops in the pantry, I quipped, "Hunger is the best seasoning." She didn't smile, only giving me a look of slight confusion and annoyance. "I've always hated that expression," she retorted. "Flavor isn't contingent to hunger." I stifled a smirk. It was this kind of commentary that earned her the nickname Robot. Spoken only behind her back, of course. "I think it just means you'll enjoy it more," I ventured. Oh, there goes Jack. She raised her eyebrows and nodded slowly, then resumed picking at her salad with her plastic fork. All of our utensils and even some light tools were 3D printed from the same sturdy white plastic, so they could easily be recycled into replacements. It saved precious space on the resupply sub and made for a nice little PR side note to boot. Saving the Earth didn't start and end with us, of course, but it's what put us down there to begin with. "So, you're a marine engineer?" It was barely a question. I nodded. "What do the," here she made air quotes, "folks back home think?" I started describing my mother's long-standing opposition to my career, but was soon interrupted. I meant the environmental aspect. Most of my peers are hardcore conservationists, protesters, even Keystone back in the day. You can imagine the dismal view they have of all this. She gestured around the cafeteria. As if Averill couldn't just fill my spot in an hour. "They should be behind it, the Enviro crowd, I mean," she continued. I said nothing, intuiting she was about to rant. She did not disappoint. "It's a knee-jerk reaction to the simplest understanding of what we're after. Natural gas. It's their worst nightmare, no doubt, that centuries' worth of energy can be found down here, and that we'll be able to extract it." I nodded, swallowing the rest of my spicy meal. "But the thing is, it's getting out, whether we harvest it or not. We've already warmed the oceans enough to start melting a decade ago. Like any greenhouse gas, the more of it escapes into the atmosphere, the faster it warms up, which in turn..." "The clathrate gun hypothesis," I interrupted. It was one of the many topics we'd covered during months of preparation and training. Here's Jack. "All right, come on, Jack." Seemingly satisfied, she continued. "That's one of the leading hypotheses for the cause of the Permian extinction event." Oh, I don't know. Can you see him? You see the microphone moving. Jack, this way. Resulted in rapid warming in an atmosphere most large animals couldn't breathe. We're probably on our way into the same outcome. But if we harvest the ice before it melts and use it in fuel cells, the emissions are far less potent than the methane itself would be. Two birds, one stone. That's the way she pitched it to me. Humanity gets fuel cleaner than gasoline, and our descendants avoid choking to death in an unbreathable atmosphere. There he is. See the little tail? Little squirrel tail. Let's see. By 2020, all the leading electric car companies had included optional methane fuel cell range extenders, which would increase the distance they'd be able to drive with full energy. It's among the few hydrocarbon fuels that can both be used in a fuel cell and is also liquid at ambient pressure and room temperature. Kind of a awkward Awkward sentences. Some companies even produce models designed around methanol cells as their primary energy source, with a much smaller battery serving as the buffer. On average, you'd be able to drive 30 or so miles on electric before needing to switch over to alternative energy, which is the norm for hybrids. With the advances in methanol engineering, more cars are using alternative sources. I actually have one like that myself. I'm just trying to follow the... You need an editor. An editor. What is with your tail? Cora didn't expect a lot from me, and that's how I liked it. I just sat there finishing off my tray as she went on and on about how we were saving the world, not trashing it. I'm a good listener, so I'm told, but what kind of compliment is that? There's nothing to it, assuming the other party's in the mood to gab, I mean. The stout... He's crazy. The stout little sub came to a gentle stop just outside the extractor field near Compass 2. I didn't relish an EVA, especially after all the damage done to the installation, but it had to be done if we were to continue. As we readied to gear up, I thought back to my first real sea walk. To say I'd been apprehensive would be an understatement. Why wouldn't you just get in the ADSs at this point? That way, if the seals break or whatever. I mean, I guess it's probably harder to move around in. Let's see. Being wholly immersed in an all-powerful force of nature is humbling. I can still remember that day, especially those first few minutes outside. I remember turning slowly to see the sparse outfacing dome windows of Compass 1, their illumination receding into the distance, the world of color, light, air, and sound pulling gradually away as I trudged into the silent darkness. Hang on, okay, You're a weirdo, Jack. You're a weirdo. You could probably hear him rubbing his face against the microphone stand or the mic boom or whatever. Yeah, I'm a little confused because they say Compass 1. I feel like it's probably Compass 2, but they probably, made a mistake. It was Lyle Tyson and Virgil Faye. I'm going to say Faye because fail sounds bad. Faye. It was Lyle Tyson and Virgil Faye from the EVA team who accompanied me, despite the engineer's protest that he had better things to do. Oh, wait. Okay. Okay, he's talking about his first real sea walk. I didn't realize we were... yeah, see, this is what I mean. He's remembering his first real sea walk. It wasn't like, oh, I thought back to my first real sea walk, and blah, blah, blah. And this is what happened during that first sea walk. Jack, do you have to be such a weirdo? He's just... Okay, so this is Compass 1. This is in the past now. Okay. Despite the engineer's protests that he had better things to do, Lyle gave everyone the same long, grumpy spiel. Or is it spiel? Spiel. His Welsh accent enunciating a litany of frustrations about the cost per minute required to put him at the bottom of the sea. Jack. See, this is what he does. He goes back and forth where the mouse is, and he's purring like crazy. You guys probably can't hear it though. Okay. Lyle had to take me on ride-alongs during routine checkups on the external gear, with Virgil making sure we didn't get into any trouble. While normally we'd take the sub, they thought it would be better for us to walk the dimly lit path from the habitat to the first extractor field, which was later abandoned. I was still adjusting to life in the lab, we all were, and they figured it would be a good way to get my feet wet, pun intended. Lyle was a seasoned sea walker, but Virgil's skills... Oh, now I got hair all over my face. Virgil's skills in the ADS truly impressed me. He could move about so deftly despite the suit's considerable bulk. But I knew he had hundreds of dive hours on me, enough to master the maneuverability and float he gained underwater. After the checkups, Virgil suggested some exercises to familiarize me with the suit for real. We did some light hops using the pump jets, and then some turns. We spent what felt like hours down there to get a feel for the terrain of the seafloor, which created its own set of navigational challenges. Eventually, after they seemed satisfied, I didn't fall face first into the sand. It was time to head back. Yeah, I need another drink, and Jack needs more petting. You're so crazy, Jack. All right. We're about halfway through. Oh, Jack, you're such a crazy cat. While on the outside, I noticed many details that had previously eluded me. For instance, the habitat's groaning noises were caused by various modules shifting slightly as they adjusted to the currents. The suit itself made similar noises when compressed air displaced seawater, like the sound of a metal space heater shuddering as it expands or contracts slightly during use. I imagined if I looked carefully, I could see the shape of my helmet's viewing dome deforming slightly as the lockout equalized with the habitat interior. In water, the suit's weight is mostly canceled out by the... Do you have to lay right there? Do not... Come on. He just likes to lay on top of the mouse. In water, the suit's weight is mostly canceled out by the buoyancy of the air inside, but on dry land they become movable hulks. Impossible to so much as lift your foot, much less walk. There you go, there's the answer. Because it's based on the buoyancy of the air inside them when you're underwater. Got it. Back in the sub, yeah, so if you're in a sub and that sub gets taken out, you're basically screwed. Back in the sub, I watched over JB's shoulder as he operated the keypad for the ADS rack. Despite all those training exercises and EVAs, going outside still put a lump in my throat. It's nerve-wracking. Having only a few inches of metal and padding between you and the sea is nerve-wracking at best. Even more so given the heightened stakes we were facing. Despite that, it was small comfort knowing that I wouldn't need JB or the doctor's help getting poured in. Figured, oh, see, Jack. He loves me, though. That's why he's doing this. Bless you. I winced. I mean, you'd think you'd need someone's help to get the suit on because it's such a pain. I winced at the loud kerchunk of the suit release mechanism. Everything is so heavy down there. Suits, subs, doors, even the air you breathe and the ubiquitous darkness carry a greater weight than on the surface. There's no way to ignore the magnitude of the physical forces involved. You're confronted by it at every turn. It was awkward having to suit up in a place that was so crowded. It was a challenge not bumping into anyone else. JB was done first, then Cora, then me. We all moved aside towards the back to make room. JB insisted we check ourselves first before we go. In God we trust, everything else gets triple checked. This was something he said often, usually with a wry smile. This time it sounded like a prayer. Yeah, especially when diving. Underwater Hamster Guy mentioned that you have triple redundant life support systems. You're crazy. Which makes sense because, just think about it. You don't want one backup, you want two. In case one thing goes wrong and then something else goes wrong. Let's see. He transferred over into the lockout chamber first via rail-mounted coupling overhead. Once through, the mechanism set his suit down, then gripped and held it steady with clamps at the ankles. The coupling whirred back into the main chamber to collect the doctor. My feet found their way into the ponderous titanium boots. I tested the hip and knee joints, raised my hands over my head. The top half of the suit slid down over me, my arms finding their metal sleeves. A series of loud pops followed as the top and bottom halves of the suit met. The wrist-mounted PDA device booted up and the heads-up display came into focus. It's not really a heads-up display, though, is it? It's like on the inside of the helmet. I guess that's I don't know. By the time I was ferried into the lockout chamber, snug within my titanium cocoon, my companions were already outside. The sub wasn't perched on the bottom, but instead hovered a few feet above it, exterior lights illuminating the seabed in a modest radius. I noted just how barren the seascape was, as if for the first time. We debated whether or not to split up and settled on fanning out but remaining in sight. The visibility was relatively good at this depth, mostly because there was no algae, but the drop-off was still fairly severe. If you've ever played Subnautica, you can switch to the... There's like one of those color settings that you can do, like cinematic, I think, that makes it pretty close to what it actually is. Apparently, when you're diving, it really cuts the general light. Like, it really cuts the general light, but like point light sources, like things that like shoot a, you know, like a flashlight pointed right at you, are super bright. Things that'll actually cut through things that actually cut through the water, or the light that cuts through the water will be really bright. But all like the, you know, diffused rays, like if you're looking at it kind of from the side, you won't be able to see it at all. I assume that's kind of what they're talking about here. Imagine being enveloped in an ever-present black fog. As an object, a sub or an ADS, recedes from you, the form becomes invisible after less than 100 feet. You can only make out whatever parts are self-illuminated. Then, all you can see are the lights. After that, nothing. That sounds about right. There's a video, too, of a two divers, right? Like, one he's filming it with a camera or whatever, and there's a diver ahead of him. And all of a sudden, like just a few feet away, a great white shark comes out and just swims right by him. And it's literally like, you know, 4 feet in front of the diver, and it's like all of a sudden you just see it, and then it goes by, and then you don't see it anymore, and you're like, holy shit. Now the shark can see them. They can't see it. That's how it goes. We are on page 35 out of 70, so exactly halfway through. Right, Jack? Oh, he's laid down in my lap now, so he's a little calm. A little bit calm. Oh, geez, are we almost done with the time? We'll keep going. Let's see. The water's edge. I'm told I handle pressure well. Of course, you have to even end up in a situation like ours, but it's been a recurring compliment for me since college. I've even been called fearless. I don't give myself that much credit. I'm not immune to fear, but I try my best to remain in control. Recognize it for what it is. Fear is a natural response that serves a crucial purpose. It's one of evolution's many gifts, primal, raw, and unmistakable. When you're afraid, it's just instinct warning you, bracing you for impact. Many people surrender to it, consciously or subconsciously, allowing it to take over. I don't engage my fear directly. I dread being overwhelmed, lost like a small ship in a tempestuous sea. Instead, I view fear from a distance. I think, rely only on the facts, and follow the list. If you can kind of dissociate from it, that's probably pretty helpful. First, I break down the situation into comprehensible components, itemizing the steps needed to solve my predicament. It's like a little version of me is toiling away in a snug office in the back of my mind, while a wild and unreasonable storm rages right outside. The mindset of an engineer, I suppose, and something I credit for keeping me sane, sharp, and, most of all, alive. Once I've settled on the steps and ordered them accordingly, it's time to get busy. Finish one step, move on to the next, and then the next, and so on, until I've succeeded. It's machine-like, rote and symbol-minded, walled off from the unhelpful influence of emotion. That's the way it needs to be, and it's rarely failed me. In the summer of 2002, after graduating with a degree in mechanical engineering from Cal Poly, I set out on an impromptu trip around Southern California. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, or even that I was going. I just upped and left, packing a single bag filled with some clothes, a camera, a map, and some food. Like a novice mariner at the water's edge, direction but no destination. It proved to be a poorly thought out plan. I only expected to visit a few parks, staying at cheap motels, but eventually found myself entering the Mojave Desert. It was my first visit, despite it not being far from my home in Lompoc. I figured it would be a good opportunity to hike and explore. While driving past both Granite and Edgar Peaks, I became aware of a kind of peace I only felt while traveling in the wilderness. Arriving at Kelso Depot, one of the visitor stations, I checked in around 11 a.m. and made arrangements to rent a Jeep outfitted with a GPS. Traveling through the open desert necessitated an off-road vehicle. My third-hand station wagon was clocking over 90,000 miles and wouldn't have lasted 10 minutes on the rough terrain. Do they even make station wagons anymore? I don't know. I'm sure they do. Maybe a hearse. Let's see. The ranger at the post warned me not to rely too much on electronic hand-holding, as numerous unfortunate tourists over the years had found themselves stranded after blindly following outdated charts to a T. Death by GPS, she said with a shrug and half-smile. Yeah, that's happened to me before, almost. It's like, turn right here and drive through this brick wall. Like, no. Take a left here and drive into this empty field to get to your destination. It's like, no. Turn right here. Oh, wait, it was actually 6 miles back. Yep. That's why I know how to read a map. And I don't like using GPS. I drove around, seeing the sights with no particular destination in mind. I just wanted to take in the wilderness, and blazing my own trail was liberating. At the time, I was tremendously excited for the future, having never felt more free. I parked on top of a large hill overlooking the vast landscape, and lay on the hood, propped against the windshield. Excuse me. The train in the distance was... Okay, there goes Jack, and now I have cat hair on my face again. The train in the distance was slightly flat, with the smaller ridges coming into view, breaking the horizon line. He is shedding everywhere, dude. As the cool air... Oh, cat hair in my mouth. As the cool air tousled my hair, I watched clouds drift past, leaving shadows across the earth. I was filled with the kind of peace that doesn't come around too often. I enjoy solitude, and here it was at its finest. After nearly 4 hours of driving and sightseeing, I circled back to the station. Dusk was approaching, and the wind was picking up and getting colder. While I did indeed consult the GPS, I was also making notes on my map. Keeping my current position in mind, it was fairly easy to chart my course. On my return, I made a tight turn around some boulders, and one of the tires hit a larger rock. I was going too fast and lost control. The Jeep careened off the ridge and rolled all the way down, and although I can't know for sure, I must have hit my head on the steering wheel and blacked out. Wow, okay. What did he say was his, Why was it a poorly thought out plan? You got in a car accident. That's not quite the same thing. Okay, well. It was a poorly thought out plan because I hit a rock and went off a cliff. Alright. Sorry guys, whoever wrote this, I'm not gonna go easy on you. It's interesting, but and the game was interesting too, but maybe a run through an editor. Wow. I dimly recall waking up slumped over the wheel, groggy but increasingly aware of the scents and sounds around me. Oil dribbling down at an irregular tempo, cries of birds circling overhead, my own heartbeat steady and sure. I sat there for a few moments trying to process what had happened. Thankfully, the Jeep came to rest upright and on its tires. There was still plenty of light out, so I knew I hadn't been out for long. I extracted myself from the car and observed the scene. A few bumps and a nasty gash on my left temple, but I was fine. My map, however, was missing, most likely gone with the wind. The GPS was damaged too. An older model, it required on the car's battery to operate. In spite of all this, I felt calm and in control. I was upright and intact, which is what matters most. All I had to do was follow the list. Make sure you're okay, check your resources, get a lay of the land, make it back to safety. Using the first aid kit stowed in the glove compartment, I assessed and treated my injuries. My forehead was a bloody mess, but at least I'd been wearing a seatbelt. It looked worse than it was, though. I cleaned the wound with alcohol, carefully applied bandages, then assessed the damage to the car, tires, undercarriage, finally under the hood. The Jeep wasn't going anywhere, so I stuffed the first aid kit into my backpack, took one last cursory inspection for anything I might have missed, and moved on. From that point on, I was piecing together the notes I'd taken and referencing any landmarks I'd seen. Thankfully, I wasn't that far from the visitor station. I traveled about 8 miles, but after circling back, the distance was only 6.5. Because I'd plotted a path through some particularly distinctive landscape littered with boulders, rough terrain, and trees, I was confident I had a fairly good sense of where I needed to go. While driving, I passed the salt flats of the Mojave known as the Devil's Playground. The name is ominous, but for all intents and purposes, it was just like any of the other salt flats that comprised the roughly 40 square miles of desert. Getting lost there can be extremely dangerous. Any sense of direction is skewed, making even the most basic destination difficult to chart. It's all too easy to lose yourself. Near the flats, I saw some oddly positioned boulders I'd passed shortly before the crash, one of Mother Nature's many quirks, and made a note of them on my map. It's the little things like that gave me some idea of how far I was from the station. After making my way up the hill and past the boulders, I trekked northeast towards a worn-down hiking trail I'd passed. This time, following the road would have been for the best. After about an hour of walking, it was near dark, and I still wasn't sure if I was near the station. Still, I knew I was going the right way, encouraged by more familiar landmarks. It's always important to take what you know about your situation, all the details obvious and innocuous, and shape it to your advantage. By now, I wasn't worried about getting lost, only how much farther I'd have to travel to find help. The air was cooling quickly, and my sweat-soaked body didn't appreciate each gust. After another hour of walking, I came across signs that told me what I needed to know. I was nearing the station. Sometimes life cuts you a break. I just kept focused on putting one foot in front of the other, each shoe sinking into the rapidly cooling sand. Though I was in reasonably decent shape, I was a mess by the time the ranger station came into sight. Drenched in sweat, legs aching, lungs on the verge of exploding, I'm surprised I didn't keel over along the way. I'd taken breaks, but the cumulative experience had left me wiped out. I stumbled through the front door of the station and weaved groggily towards the front desk of the visitor area. Lord knows what I've done if there was a line. The same ranger from before was still there, wrapping up her shift. She realized what happened without explanation. It had been nearly 7 hours since I left the station, which was set to close within the half hour. I was treated for the swelling and injuries. The rangers made arrangements to recover the Jeep in the morning. I sat in the station, guzzling down water, thinking it was the sweetest nectar I'd ever tasted. Of course, as the events of last year showed, I may have been hasty in that assumption. Not long after, I found myself sitting in my own beat-up compact, which I'd passed without a glance as I staggered across the parking lot. Despite what happened, I was mostly fine, well enough to decline a trip to the hospital. I still felt annoyed over losing the map, wondering where I might buy a new one. And in that moment, it truly sunk in that I could have died out there. And then, a moment after that, pride in having handled it so well. Choosing to block out the unnecessary and focusing on the steps needed to overcome the problem at hand is what saved my life. From that day forward, I would stick to the list, and so it was, 2 miles beneath the surface of the South Pacific Ocean. The lights from the other two suits slowly and carefully pulled ahead of me. We walked along salt flats in a boundless black expanse, one foot in front of the next, boots sinking into the soft sand, with darkness all around. Should I keep going? When's the, let's see, so this is 8. Follow procedure, which was also the 8th mission in the game. Or 8th event or whatever. Let's see, what is this? So, 39. Or 44. Let's do, yeah, okay, we'll do follow procedure. Every few steps, we'd call each other by radio to verify the signal was still clean. The ADS suit-to-suit comm systems had a range of about 15 feet, but this wasn't the time to leave anything to chance. It's not hard to become acutely aware of life's limitations down there. The event had amplified those, and even layered in some extras. Deep-sea radio waves have a difficult time transmitting long distances due to the electrical conductors present in saltwater. This simple limitation was a key factor in why Oceanova was a manned mission. It couldn't feasibly be accomplished by remote control. In order to stay in touch with the surface, a signal buoy was tethered to the hab, like an expensive version of the tin can telephone. It was an analog solution in a digital age, but it was the most reliable way to stay connected with the surface. The damage from the shockwave had exacerbated things, disrupting base communications on our end. The cable was still active and connected the buoy to the surface. For all the folks on the surface knew, we were just fine. The quickening sound of my breath bounced around the helmet. Whenever I made a concerted effort to breathe easy, I heard my heartbeat instead, throttling up or down as I worked the suit. A bizarre sensation, but familiar. Even in the habitat, you couldn't ever fully shake the feeling of being cooped up in a container. Unlike being on the surface, where your eardrums are always equalized to the pressure outside, you can't open a window or door without worrying whether your outfit is on correctly. 2 miles deep, any survivable space, such as the hab, is a pressure vessel. A nick or bruise in the wrong spot, and it collapses under the raw weight of seawater and gravity. You could feel it in your eardrums each time you passed from one wing to another on account of minute differences in the air pressure, equalizing any time a hatch opened. You heard it in the subtle metallic echoes after any loud noise. The effect was compounded greatly when you were alone. An ADS is practically a mobile sensory deprivation chamber. It's not really something you wear, rather it wears you. It's a human-shaped container. Aside from the arms and legs, the suit wasn't flexible. Even the most basic of human movements didn't rely on traditional muscle memory. It was a constant lesson in humility. We arrived at the extractor fields outside the Compass 2. In the distance, we could see the side of the structure clearly. The lights were on, illuminating the exterior damage. In spite of the situation, I couldn't help but pause to admire the view. Dire circumstances aside, I knew that few will ever see such sights in person. The methane extractors in the field around us loomed. The field was like a grove of mechanical trees, roots soaking up the salt of the earth. Walking through them in the dark, even on a normal day, puts ice in your blood, even more so with a metallic orchard in ruin. Plumes of methane drifted through the scene like smoke, lingering after a forest fire. A sinister reminder of best intentions lost. It felt like exploring the woods at night. The foreshadowing of shadows cast by your flashlight, conjuring distorted, looming forms all around. The effect was made all the more chilling by the mildly adhesive nature of the soft sediment. I frequently had to stop in place and gently pull my boots free, all the while feeling like the shadows were watching. I've heard it compared to walking on the moon, but the substance we were walking on is altogether different. Regolith is ultrafine, with the texture of tiny shards of glass. The sediment, mostly diatom shells and decomposing marine snow, is super soft, pliant, almost gooey. What lay beneath this substance was why we were here in the first place. Methane was abundant, but encaged in ice, which was in turn trapped below the sea floor. Improved methodologies and technologies from the energy industry, are what made harvesting of methane hydrate possible in the first place. It resembles ice in its raw state, burns when it comes in contact with flame or high temperatures, one of nature's oxymorons. Fire and ice, you think of them as opposites. With frozen methane, it's one and the same. It's beautiful when it burns. It crackles like twigs on a campfire. The flame's not so hot, so the features fade slowly. The condensation runs down, pools, then contracts. It's beautiful, and then it's gone. Breathing and incomprehensible mumbling came over comms, staticky but unmistakably male. It was JB, now clearly in a sensitive state. If something was about to push him over the edge, I wanted to know as soon as it happened. I remained silent. I wonder if he found his kid. Because they're walking around the extractor fields, right? Dr. Vanderoe was silent as well, presumably for the same reason. When I finally heard her voice, it was a stream of excited chatter. I found someone. JB stopped moving and I reflexively strained, listening for some reaction. Nothing but silence as we approached. Hang on, why would... Okay, why would JB... Oh. Okay. I assume he found someone, that's why he was going crazy, but apparently not. We found her near the front of one of the modules, pointing up towards a catwalk. 2 stories tall, it was used to monitor the equipment in the field. A body was visible, male, clad in an orange jumpsuit. His back was against the railing of the catwalk. Judging from the hole in the wall opposite him, an explosion had ejected him from the hab. Mercifully, death would have come quickly. Okay. Yeah, I don't remember which one that is, but I remember it. The doctor said nothing. JB was motionless. We all knew it was JJ. That's not right. That's not right. JJ is the one that was face down, right? JJ's the one that was face down wearing the suit in the extractor field. Okay. Whatever. The doctor said nothing. JB was motionless. We all knew it was JJ. JB neither screamed nor cried, but simply stood there looking up at his son. My boy. There was nothing else to say. Wordlessly, we agreed to give him a moment to grieve, though we could barely afford such luxury. I just wish they got their details correct. A cluster of self-illuminated extractors edged from view from beyond a rocky outcrop. The adjacent pumps, connected by thick black hose, still pulsed rhythmically in the darkness. I couldn't hear it, of course, but from that distance I could make out the mild vibrations. The machines were mostly automated. We'd arrived while they were on break. I signaled the others. We had to shut down the machinery in order to stop the leak back in the hab. Our return would have to wait. Undeniably inconvenient, but given all the chaos, I felt a twinge of relief. For a moment at least I could simply follow procedure. The doctor and I made our way to the field's nearby power station and accessed the control terminals, overloading the power dispersion, which forced the system into shutdown. The extractor field lights faded and the nearby module went dark. JB caught up to us without a word. In our rush to get to the power station, we hadn't noticed he'd lagged behind. Not that anyone could fault him for it. With the power now cut, the methane leakage had ceased, reducing likelihood of further damage to Compass 1. Or maybe 2. Don't know. They're at Compass 2. The grieving man was still standing near the module, silent and unmoving. Dr. Vanderoe stepped in, stating that we had to make our next move. JB broke from his grief long enough to express agreement. We had to move on to Compass 2. Right, I mean, yeah, okay, anyway. They're at Compass 2, or, near it. Given the close proximity from the extractor field, it was the most logical rendezvous point. As we made our way to the sub, JB stopped to look once more towards his son. There was no way to reach him and no time. After a spell of deafening silence, he turned to join us and didn't look back. Standing outside the sub, and JB used his PDA to patch in the sub's communication system and broadcast a repeating transmission. We wanted to advertise our presence to any potential stragglers. Also, they never told us they were leaving, right? There was that one with like the 5-minute warning, like, hey, we're about to leave. We wanted to advertise our presence to any potential stragglers. It was a long shot at best. The sub provided a signal boost, but with our limited setup, it was a one-way line. This is JB Castillo calling anyone in the vicinity of Extractor Field 4. We came from Compass 1 and are moving on to the Compass 2 in 10 minutes. Repeat, we are leaving for Compass 2 in 10 minutes. If you're receiving this, converge on our signal. Cat hair. We hoped that even if our message was incomprehensibly garbled, it would still be enough to let others in the vicinity know they weren't alone. Minutes ticked by tortuously, but there was no response. We gave another shot. This is JB Castillo of the EVA team. I'm with Kip and Dr. Vanderoe. We're calling any other survivors in the area. Converge on this signal. We are leaving for Compass 2 in 5 minutes. Repeat, we are leaving in 5 minutes. Wouldn't they be like, hey, meet us at Compass 2? Oh, no, they're trying to Whoever's out there, wouldn't they know who's out there? Wouldn't they like have schedules or something? Endless, all-enveloping silence. Unsurprising. Like they should have crew manifestos or something like, today's the day that you're supposed to do the fields, blah, blah, blah. Like you should know where people are supposed to be. I mean, ideally, right? Unsurprising, but still disappointing. No one said anything. Maybe it had been a futile effort, but in the end, even if the one thing we'd found was closure for JB, it was worth doing. We reached the sub, painstakingly passed through the lockout chamber once more, and secured our suits in their alcoves. JB rubbed his head absent-mindedly, looking more confused than grief-struck. Just then, sub's terminal pinged. The doctor approached it, cycling through the messages, and turned towards us with a look of shock. Someone's in the hab, she stated while pointing to the monitor. The power in Compass 1 was reset, diverted to the other docking terminal. The sub's rerouting its course with the other terminal online. It's not automated. Something like that had to be done manually. Power in Compass 1 was reset, diverted to the other docking terminal. Sub's rerouting its course with the other terminal online. Okay. Right, so there's two docking terminals. So the sub is rerouting its course because the Compass 1 docking terminal was changed, I guess. Is that what they're saying? Or is the sub being recalled to Compass 1? It's not. In the game, it sounded like they were coming back on purpose. They're like, hey, Survivor, we picked up your thing. We're going back to Compass 1. My heart sank at the thought of us returning to Compass 1. Much of it has surely collapsed due to flooding and structural damage. I envisioned a derelict lab devoid of signs of life. But the three of us were bound together, and after a brief discussion of alternatives, mostly whether or not to make a break for Compass 2, JB and me were willing to risk going back on the off chance of one of our comrades was still alive. The doctor reluctantly agreed. Our little sub carried 4 suits in total, leaving a spare for whomever it was we hoped to find back in the hab. We could bring them with us to Compass 2, but it would be a tight fit. 2 or 3 people would be an entirely different story altogether. Still, we had to take the risk. Someone could be alive back there. That was all the reason we needed. We engaged the return protocol in the sub's terminal. Okay, there you go. To travel back to Compass 1. Incessant beeping and blinking on the monitor confirmed our destination was set. With a familiar lurch, the little sub's motors kicked in, and we were off. Walking coffin number 9. Well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time and attention. I really do appreciate it. I really hope you're enjoying these episodes, especially these specifically. The book's okay. The book's all right. It's kind of annoys me. There's little details here and there that are not quite right, and then the writing is so, but it's whatever. I did want to see what was going on from Kip's perspective, so that's accomplishing that. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope to see you guys next time. Until then, guys, take care, and maybe Jack will join us next time.